Today is a really important day, and it's a really important show for the Bridge. It might be the most important show that I've done. This is a day where I'm going to have a guest on today named Tim Fleiszer, who is an ex-CFL athlete, played 10 years, has a great history. We're going to talk about that, about his past, and about what he's accomplished. But since then has been very involved in the world of helping Canadians deal with the issue of concussions in sports, and not only in sports. I'm excited about it for a number of reasons. Number one, probably because it's something that I've dealt with myself in terms of playing football as I did and having concussions myself. And we may get into a little bit of that. More so because I've got a lot of friends who have had issues with concussions and who have succumbed to them. And I think that there's a lot of variables here that need to be discussed. And the work that Tim is doing is just exceptional. So I'm looking forward to this interview. I'm looking forward to this conversation and really hoping that we can give some value and give some great information about the work Tim's doing and the work people in Canada are doing right now with this issue and with this challenge that so many people should be concerned about. Tim Fleiszer, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here with me today. This is a new podcast, and I mean, you're just doing such great work right now. It's timely. I did an intro already, but probably the most meaningful conversation that I've had so far. So thank you very much for being here.
I will hopefully live up to that, Commie.
Well, that's like always the humble man, always the humble man. You always were. And so I'll just for anybody that's watching right now, I want to go through a little bit of your accolades from football. So Tim, 10 years in the CFL, the only man alive to have won 4 Grey Cups with 4 different teams. Hilarious to me because you played 3 of the 4 teams you played on were teams that I played on. I won a Grey Cup with one team a couple times. I was lucky enough to do it. But you won a Grey Cup with Hamilton in 99 when you were, Danny Mac, amazing team. I remember just being jealous of that team as an offensive lineman because Danny Mac threw the ball in about 1.5 seconds. So what a job as an O-lineman. Not that they weren't great. And then you were Montreal in 2002 against me. Thank you. And then in Edmonton, again with me now. Now I come back. No, that was 2005 or 3?
05.
That was 05. So I had been traded to Hamilton and I went back to where you used to play and we were awful. We lost 10 of the 12 games I was there for, which not great. Came back to Edmonton and we ended up winning a Grey Cup in 05 together. And then you go on and you win with the Rough Riders. And what year was that? Was that your 10th year?
That was 10th year. So that was my last year. That was 07.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then that time to go. Like at that point, you're just like, well, I don't know. What am I going to do now?
Yeah, that last year, I was playing a lot less than I had. And, when you start showing up for games and you're not excited anymore, it's time to shut it down.
Yeah.
In my subsequent career as an agent, I would always tell the guys, I hope for your sake that you get to play long enough where it's just out of your heart, because then it's really easy to walk away. But unfortunately, that's often not the case, right? It's always sort of one more game, one more season, wish I had one more of this or one more of that. So I felt incredibly blessed to be able to walk away with just nothing left to give, nothing more to contribute. And so it was easy.
That's well said. And then I would say my job was to try to play my last game. And I did it. I would now, and we're going to get into a conversation later about your current work. And I think I'm going to take some of that back for advice for people, because I don't necessarily think that you should play the last game that you have in you. Then you got into being an agent. And what drove you there? Why were you passionate about that? Because I remember speaking to you and you were passionate about that.
Yeah, it certainly, I had never considered it as a career choice. And it actually happened at that last Grey Cup in 07, which was in Toronto, Riders playing Winnipeg. And the guy who had been my agent all 10 years, Gil Scott, came to me and said, hey, I'm looking for a partner. Scott Mitchell, who had been working with him, had left to go take the president's job with the Ticats. And initially I said, Gil, I had something else lined up. And I said, thanks for thinking of me, but thanks, but no thanks. And Gil, being the good agent that he is, was very persistent and said, listen, just try it out. You can kind of just do it in the background, see how it works out. And I realized that I was already having a bunch of guys calling me in the off season asking for contract advice. And I was like, oh, well, just do this formally. And so I did give it a shot. And a lot of my former teammates were the guys who signed up first. And I had a great 10-year run with Gil. It was lots of fun. And like you said, it was great to be able to help guys, particularly the young guys, and then guide people through their career arc.
100%. So would you say that your work as an agent, what were you most passionate about in that time with when you're working with the guys?
Yeah, I think the development part, and we always say great game, but a terrible business.
Yeah.
And so just being able to use my experience and my knowledge and my connections to make sure that guys weren't taken advantage of, that they got their fair shake, and just trying to help them out in all different facets. In a lot of ways, that as we got older and we're mentoring the young guys, it really in some ways was just an extension of that.
100%. And you were lucky enough to have that 10 years where you were actually, one of those old rookies or old vets rather that took care of those young guys. I remember by the end of mine, I was I was just a grumpy. I remember being called crusty, and I was like, I don't even know who you're talking about. I can't be crusty, but I was crusty. You get to that point, right? Now, then you went from there, and now you find yourself in a situation. Now you left your agency directly to take this position as the founder and executive director of the Concussion Legacy Foundation of Canada. Is that correct?
So I had been doing the foundation work in the background. The genesis of that was my former teammate from college, Chris Nowinski, had started Concussion Legacy Foundation on the U.S. side. He had partnered with Boston University, and they were starting to do the autopsies that you've seen that have gotten so much media attention. And Chris had come and it all started. Chris wrote a book, and he wrote a book about his own experience. He had, after graduating, became a WWE wrestler and was on that circuit for a while and was doing well, and got kicked in the head one too many times, and was suffering from a lot of the things that people are now aware of and do associate with brain injury. But at the time, he didn't really know what was wrong with him. He went and saw multiple physicians, and nobody could figure out what was going on with him. And then he ends up in Bob Cantu's office. And really important the way that you ask the question. If you ask an athlete, have you had a concussion? Generally, they're going to answer no. But if you say, have you experienced any of the following symptoms: getting hit, seeing stars, getting a dull headache, feeling dizzy, and you go through that list of symptoms, the data shows that number goes from 1 or 2% of athletes a season to anywhere between 50 and 70% in football and other contact sports. So Chris, as we all did back then, said, well, yeah, those things happen all the time. And Dr. Cantu said, well, no, you're suffering from post-concussion, persistent post-concussion syndrome. And these are the steps that you need to start to take to get better. And Chris's reaction was, I've been around sports for years and years, and nobody's talking about this stuff. And he correctly ascertained that there was this hidden epidemic of brain injury happening right under our noses. And so, I was involved with that stuff from very early days, primarily on the US side. So working with Chris and team very informally, evenings and weekends, just kind of giving some of my time. And as things started to progress, and as we peeled back layers of the onion and figured out that, this wasn't just, NFL and CFL football players that had played for 20 years, and that it was a much more pervasive problem affecting all kinds of different populations. Set up the foundation on the Canadian side, 2012. We got our charitable status 2014. Partnered with Western University to mimic the Boston University relationship that had worked so well in the States. And again, while I was doing my agent work and my sports consulting work, it was just very much my background. I considered it my charitable work.
Amazing.
And then when the pandemic hit, I just kind of felt like now was the time, and I needed to push really, really hard on it. And that there was a lot of good that needed to be done, and that we'd be able to, in preventing and help properly treat and studying brain injuries, we'd really be able to help athletes, military personnel, survivors of violence and accidents, the elderly, and especially kids, all those populations that are touched by brain injury in some way.
Thank you for sharing that. I told you when we talked a couple months ago when we were planning this, and it takes a while to get this stuff done. You've been busy. I've been busy. You've been really busy. I've been keeping track. One of the things I need to do today is really to apologize, and that's to anybody that I've ever spoken to about concussions. I'm sure you have your own concussion story. As you played 10 years, we all saw stars. We all, there was times where I lost consciousness. There was times where things happened. And frankly, when the story came out, I had caught on to the fact that the world is full of grifts, and I caught on to the fact that there was just, I figured out, well, we're being lied to about food. We're being lied to about what we should eat that's going to help us gain weight. We're being lied to about what we should put in our bodies, and put that concussion piece right into that box of being lied to, because I thought it was a grift. Will Smith's going to make money making a big movie about it and trying to scare the hell out of everybody. I owe my brothers an apology because there's a lot of guys out there that are suffering. And I've seen guys lose their lives over this stuff. And the addiction problem. And even if it's not that, it's the loss of marriage. It's the loss of jobs. It's the loss of being a productive part of society. It's the loss of being able to be a productive part of a team. You know, like I had my last one in my last year and it ended my career. And it took me a long time to get over it, but I never admitted it. I knew I had it, but after I said my symptoms are over, I pretended they were over. And it's taken years to get through it. I'm not crying the blues here because I've been very lucky in my life and God's blessed me to be able to heal from a lot of stuff, but I know it's a problem. So I think you're doing great work and I appreciate it. Do you have a concussion story you want to share about yourself? Is there something like when did you realize it was?
We can if you want to, and listen, it's you know, for all of us that played for a long period of time, you know, whether it's football or hockey or rugby, you know, we all have so many similar stories. I mean, for me, it was playing in Hamilton rookie year, and we were in the Labor Day Classic, and you know what it's like to come out on the field for that. Really exciting weekend, a beautiful day, you know, national TV. So I'm out on the opening kickoff, and I run down, and you know, I was always the guy early in my career to run down and you know, smash the wedge, and so you know, we're playing Toronto, and so it's Mike O'Shea and Roger Dunbrack, and you know, a couple other those guys, you know, go in and set up the wedge. And so I go down and, you know, on film, it looked great. It looked like a bowling ball hitting pins. You know, I hit those guys, sent them all flying. With one of those, you get the gold star in special teams meetings. And from my perspective, I came off the field, you know, was sort of feeling a little weird and was standing next to Trevor Shaw and looked up at the scoreboard and it said 12 minutes left in the second quarter. And I said, hey, T. Shaw, like they got the scoreboard wrong. Like the game just started. And I had, you know, been sort of like out on my feet, I guess is the way that you would describe it. It's surprisingly, I'd played really well. I guess I was telling guys in the defensive huddle, like, you know, I don't really know where I am. And they were just kind of lining me up and made a couple of tackles that I had no memory of and finished the game, you know, sort of no big deal. And called my dad, who, you know, former Heck Creighton trophy winner and was at that time a physician for the Alouettes and the Canadians. And we laughed about it, right? Because it just wasn't a big deal.
Yes.
Then, and you know, for treatment, I went out and did tequila shots because that's what you do when you get a concussion, right? So
what you do.
Look, you know, all these stories are very similar, right? Like so many of us have had that stuff, but it is very important to understand. I mean, concussions are one thing and concussions are not a good thing. And you can have, you know, persistent symptoms. But when you're talking about CTE and a lot of the long-term issues, the risk factor is not how many concussions you've had. It's how many total impacts you've had. Basically, how many times you've been hit in the head and how hard. And that's what really causes the long-term damage. So, you know, the every day, every play, I mean, how many base blocks, you know, did you and I go head to head on, you know, practice games over the years, right? I mean, that's really where your risk factor comes from for a lot of these long-term nasty things like CT.
Well, I heard a stat years ago that you were more likely to get a concussion in soccer heading the ball than you were, you know, now is that, I guess, heading the ball, that we'd be talking more about major concussions, but yeah, it's those little hits that are adding up, correct?
Absolutely. And, you know, the biggest, you know, if we could make one single policy change in Canada protect young athletes, it would be removing headers in soccer for kids, certainly under the age of 12 and you know, probably doing it under the age of 14 is even better. And of course, a lot of those headers don't happen in games. They happen in practice with an adult lobbing a ball at a child.
That's right.
And everybody just thinks it's this innocuous little thing. But actually, when you're exposing little kids while their brains are still developing to these non-concussive impacts, it's really, really bad for them. And so Hockey Canada raised the age of body checking to 13 after the Sidney Crosby concussion. And so we need to get some of those other, you know, federal and provincial sport organizations to eliminate headers, eliminate tackling in football and rugby, you know, and some of these other contact sports, and just being really, really mindful of taking care of our kids' brains, you know, like I said, under the age of 12 when their brains are still developing.
Yeah. What else can we do for, like, what age would you say is appropriate to start tackling in football?
So, you know, I think being on the safe side, 14, you know, I've gone back to my old high school the last couple of years. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do it as much this season, but really working with the 12 and 13-year-olds to see how how tackling gets taught, right? And actually, I think they did a very, very good job in terms of the way that they were introducing it. You've seen the dynamic kickoff in the NFL this year, and that is the riskiest play when it comes to brain injury in football. Our data, when we went back and looked at it, was 30% of brain injuries were happening on kickoffs. And so we worked with a
Really? 30% on kickoffs?
30%.
On first kickoffs or kickoffs after any touchdown?
Just kickoffs in general, right?
Okay.
Like kickoffs during the course of a game. But remember, Kami, like in high school, a lot of times you put the backups out, right? To go down and run out. So you've got, less skilled athletes, that are cold running down, and, it's just physics, right? It's 40, 50 yards at full sprint. A lot of guys getting wiped out, blindside hits, that kind of thing. So when Riverdale High School in the Bronx brought us in because enrollment on their varsity football team had declined so significantly that they were at risk of canceling the program, that was one of the modifications that we made. Was we just eliminated the kickoff in high school. So team scores and they just get the ball on their own 20-yard line or whatever it is that we came up with.
Yep.
And significantly reduced head injuries. And that's why you've seen the NFL go to the dynamic kickoff.
Yeah, amazing. But that's actually really interesting because I wouldn't have put that together. That 30% is a huge number. Tell me about how you're working with the armed forces.
Yeah, so that's, what a privilege to get to work with those guys. And, the way I always talk about that, and you would have had this same experience, is every year when we play our military appreciation game in the CFL and those guys would come walking through the locker and we'd all sit up a little straighter.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, there goes the real badasses, right?
That's right.
What we did as a game and what those guys do is life and death. And so real privilege to work with those guys. On the Canadian side, started in 2018. We went and approached the Canadian Armed Forces, the guy who was the chief psychiatrist of the troops at the time. And we had our first symposium weeks before the pandemic in Kingston at Queen's University. Ken Dryden was good enough to come and be the keynote for that. And that was really our entry point into it. Within the armed forces, the guys who really brought the brain injury issue to light was a group of master breachers and specifically JTF2, so the special forces guys, master breachers.
For a guy that doesn't know, what is a master breacher?
So these are the guys who teach explosives. And so what would happen is they'd go down, with the students, and they'd often go and be with them. So what ended up happening is these guys were exposed to thousands of blasts during the course of their career. And what happened was, one day, one of those guys made a joke about, I got to go and see this doctor. And a couple of the other guys said, well, wait a minute, I'm seeing that doctor too. And they all started comparing symptoms. And they're like, wait a minute, we're all having these weird symptoms, like something weird's going on. And so they went to DRDC, which is the research arm of the Canadian Armed Forces, and said, hey, like something's going on here. Can you guys look at this? And so two researchers, Sean Ryan and Ocean Vartanian, started looking into it. And, for what we know now, unsurprisingly, came back and we're seeing issues with the brain with this group. And those guys have really been the group that have been ringing the bell internally within the CAF, pun intended. I'm pleased to say, our experience with the CAF has been polar opposite of the professional sports league. It's been really well documented, the issues with the NFL initially and continuing with the NHL and the CFL, that aren't recognizing that repetitive head impacts are the cause of CTE. The CAF has been very, very open. I'm pleased to say that dealing with those guys, very academic, very thoughtful, a very scientific approach to this. So JTF2 changed a lot of their training protocols in the same way we've done in football, right? Where what you've seen in those last CBAs in the NFL and the CFL is some real limits in terms of contact that you can have in pads in both training camp and during the work week. And so they're doing the same thing in the military, right? Where they're thinking about, do you need to fire 200 rounds? Right? With the parajumpers, it's how many jumps are safe, how many blasts should these guys be around. And listen, the last thing I'm ever going to do is tell the military what to do. Yeah. I just tell them what we've done in football and how we've tried to address some of these things in football. And we've had some real movement there where they're looking at, CAF-wide, changing some of those training protocols. And then when it comes to veteran, particularly in the last couple of weeks, we've got a lot of attention for the issue. There was a big article recently in the Globe and Mail that has gotten a lot of attention on Parliament Hill. Hopefully we're going to make things better for those guys in terms of the way that we treat brain injuries.
It's really amazing to hear the transition from sports to armed forces. I mean, well, let's put it this way. When you were in Montreal, you had Don Matthews. And when you were in Montreal in 2002, when I was in Edmonton, we were copying you guys because you had a one day-a-week hitting rule. I don't think you were even hitting by the end of the year in practice. And if you just think about what it, like, I mean, just that repetitive, like you said, man, especially you get into training camp, 10, 11 days of training camp, 2 a-days, maybe you're only hitting once a day, but it's that by the end of training camp, you're toast. Your body strength is down. You got headaches, you got, whatever, however bad it is. But that rule that Don had turned there was a lot of things going for that team. We can all be honest, but it turned that team into a team that's really hard to beat. Like, they were just on game day. And then when Tom Higgins in Edmonton, he adopted that rule, and so did Danny Machocha when you were there. That's one of the things that we called it. Yeah, that's why we're winning. It's one of the reasons we're winning. We had a great team too, right? But it's that you're not stacking the deck against you, right? And it's so easy to see as an athlete. But against armed forces, how many jumps do they need? My stepdad jumped out of an airplane for 13 years. How many concussions did he have, right? It's crazy to think.
So there's actually science to validate this. So the guy who was my first hire at Concussion Legacy Foundation Canada is a guy named Jeff Brooks. And he's now Dr. Jeff Brooks, but he was a linebacker at Western for 5 years. And he had just started his master's at Western when we partnered with the school. And his research was, he was looking at total impacts that the team took over the course of 5 years. So every impact they took, training camp, practice, games, and then what he was looking at was reaction time. When you think about athletic performance, reaction time is really one of the key metrics there, right? In terms of what separates, a great athlete from a truly elite athlete. And what he found was really interesting was that reaction time got reduced proportional to the number of impacts those guys took during the course of a season and ultimately their career. But what we were surprised by is that we figured that in the offseason, there'd be some sort of return to baseline. It doesn't happen. Reaction time just gets worse and worse and worse. And in fact, he was able to quantify it where even during the course of the year, sometimes guys would be 15 or 20% slower in terms of reaction time. And when you think of that from a human performance standpoint, like, that's a huge number, right? And you said it. That absolutely would translate to the field over time. And where this is really interesting is thinking about that idea of losing a step later in your career, right? Which we always assumed was, muscles and ligaments and that kind of thing. But when you actually think about from a neurological standpoint, it's really, really interesting to consider. So even if you don't care about the health of an athlete, even if you don't care about the ethics of exposing kids to activities that may give them brain injury when they're too young to actually consent to doing that, even if all you cared about was athletic performance, you still shouldn't hit kids in the head when they're little, because it's going to ruin their reaction time later on and hurt them, as they try and progress into the, through high school, into college, and then, ultimately into the pros.
Shocking to me that you just told me that the hits accumulate and slows your reaction time down and it doesn't come back. Crazy. Can you say that again? I heard that right?
You heard that exactly right. And like, the way to think about it is, so one of the issues that we're dealing with the veterans is when they try and fill out their paperwork, they say, well, where did you get hurt? And the issue is that it's thousands of times, right? It's thousands of micro imperceptible injuries. The way one of my colleagues, Dr. Samantha Bureau, talks about is water on a stone. One drip doesn't cause anything, but over time, you'll see significant erosion, right? And so all long-term athletic development philosophy needs to incorporate that. Again, even if you don't care about the health and the ethics of these athletes, just strictly for performance, we should be absolutely changing the way that we're developing athletes over time. And it absolutely has applications within the military as well.
Amazing. Are you talking to all the CFL teams right now? Like, are you in conversations with these guys?
We've been talking to them for years. We've been talking to them in the CFLPA. The guys who have been the best would have been the Ticats. Scott Mitchell and Bob Young were very early supporters of this. They actually contributed financially. This is before it was in vogue to do so. And they had incorporated a lot of this stuff into their practice schedule very early on. Some guys were more progressive. Some teams were more progressive. Some teams were not. Some people in the early days had the same reaction you did, that it was, this was all nonsense and some sort of money grab, which I can tell you working in the nonprofit space is not great financially. If somebody has ideas about kind of trying to make a lot of money, it's actually I can tell you from experience, it's the wrong area to do it. But back to what you said initially, the two coaches that I had, Ron Lancaster was the same way. We never hit in practice my first 2 years. And then Don. Those were two guys, two very, very successful coaches that never hit. And you look back at some of the years where we weren't quite as successful, thinking especially about Rod Rust in 2001. I mean, he just beat that team into the ground in practice.
Mm-hmm.
We had Pierre Vercheval on that team. I think he was 37 years old, and we were hitting all 3 days. I mean, we were hitting day 3. Yeah, and it just.
I mean, I had Cal Murphy in Saskatchewan in 98. I mean, Cal was, God bless him, but I remember getting off a plane after we lose to BC by 1,000 points. And what does he do? He takes us right to the stadium to hit.
Because that's the way the Steelers had done it, right? And
it makes you tough, right? It makes you tough. And what a ridiculous notion.
And unsurprisingly, that was the team where you first saw so many of those guys having problems.
With the Steelers, yeah.
With the Steelers, and because they had won those 4 Super Bowls, I mean, that philosophy just kind of permeated for a while thereafter. But it's good to see how that's evolved these days, and good to see that, like I said, in the last 2 collective bargaining agreements on both sides of the border, things are way better.
Well, I'm excited because I just heard today that Chris Morris is getting involved in the organization of Edmonton right now. I mean, I think there's a guy you can talk to that's going to, he'll definitely advance things, because he's been coaching forever, but was a player that understood this when we played together back in the day. This. I mean, just a smart guy that cares about people, right? So kudos. That'll be a good conversation. I wish I could be a fly on the wall for that one.
Yeah, I mean, C. Murder to me was just one of those guys that represents everything that's good about the league, right? Great, yes. Tough as nails, really smart, intellectual guy. Great with the fans, super popular in the community, did a lot for the community. I was thrilled to see that he was the choice. He'll do a great job.
I just think they're coming back. As soon as I saw that I know exactly who he's going to be. Well, I don't know exactly because I'm not talking to him right now, but I will ask him eventually who he's going to be talking to. And I'm excited about seeing what that team does, because I've hated seeing them take the path that they've taken. And I know that he can bring them back to Edmonton style football, which is going to be kind of cool.
I mean, you think back to those games, Commie, where you play the Labor Day game and then they come back and, play that game back at Edmonton. You couldn't get a ticket. And you look now and, so many empty seats out there. And, like you said, good to see Chris in Edmonton. Good to see Jay McNeil in Calgary. It's always you offensive linemen that end up in these leadership positions.
It's just sneaky because we just quietly go about business and then end up showing up. That's just like practice.
That's it. Well, listen, there is something very intellectual about O-line, right? I mean, it really is a position where you need to be very cerebral.
Yeah, it's and there's an understanding. And I mean, obviously I can't be objective about this, but there's an understanding about 5 players working together to get things done, and how important it is that, everybody has to do their job and have to know what weaknesses people have so you can protect them. Right. So there's a whole unity inside that team. But I mean, you could say the same about D-backs, right? There is a lot of, I think the game of football to me is the game that exemplifies a whole bunch of different people getting together for the same goal and getting it done. So
it is the ultimate team sport. I was reflecting on before coming on the interview today, and thinking about when I had to come into Saskatchewan and line up against you and Andrew Green and Jeremy O'Day. Man, bring your lunch pail to come play you guys.
We had some fun.
With apologies to Montreal, I mean, you guys may have been the best guys in the league, consistently over time. I mean, I hate it when I had to come in and play tackle against you guys and line up on the inside. I was always thrilled when I got to go, and play at end and be out. Not that I, had much more success out at end than I did, because you're lined up with Gino and, who's just so good from a balance perspective, or Charles Thomas. But you guys set the standard.
Listen, man, I take that as a huge compliment. That was a great offensive line. When they traded me away, I was pretty bitter, to be honest. I was brokenhearted. Well, that's when you learn it's a business.
Yeah.
And what happened? I ended up in 3 Grey Cups in 2 years. 3 Grey Cups, 3 years, right? Something like that. How many hits did I have today? Not many.
Yeah, I got over that changing teams thing very early in my career, seeing as how, I played everywhere.
Well, it kind of worked for you. I'm not going to lie. Like, you kind of landed on your feet everywhere you went. So tell me about Bill C-277 before you go, and why it's so important, please.
So great to see. So I'll give you the very quick history. So the only concussion legislation or brain injury legislation that we have in Canada right now is in Ontario, and that's Rowan's Law. And we were very involved with that. So for anybody that doesn't know, Rowan Stringer was a 17-year-old rugby player in Ottawa that suffered multiple concussions, didn't tell her parents, didn't tell her coaches or her teachers, had told her friends, had Googled concussions, and she had texted with her friends and said, I think I have a concussion. She was a captain of a rugby team, and she was like, they had a really big game coming up. And she said, I'm going to play this game, and then I'll tell people that I've had it. And in that game, she got hit again, and there's something called that second impact syndrome, which is rare, but basically her brain swelled uncontrollably and she ended up passing away. And her parents, Gord and Kathleen, initially both of them sat on our board. Gord still sits on our board today. And they went and saw Lisa MacLeod, who's a member of provincial parliament from Nepean, and Lisa put forward an Ontario private members bill, which ultimately ended up becoming Rowan's Law. Which has been, hugely successful. And CFL alum and current Minister of Sport, Neil Lumsden, pledged to donate his brain recently for us. That was in mid-September, a month and a half ago, and really brought some great attention to the cause. And so Ontario's done a really good job addressing this. As I mentioned earlier, though, what's come to our attention is that this is a much bigger issue than just athletes. It's military personnel are affected, accident and violence survivors, the elderly. There's all sorts of different populations that are affected by brain injury. And so Bill C-277 does address that by creating a national strategy to address brain injury. And the genesis of that was very, very similar to what we saw in Ontario, where there's a woman in BC whose husband was a police officer, was in a car accident, suffered a bad brain injury, and based on her very, very difficult experience in navigating the system subsequent to her husband's brain injury, led her to approach Alistair McGregor, who's a member of parliament from Vancouver Island, and he put forward as a private members bill. And so we, in May, did a couple of days on Parliament Hill to try and get support for both the bill and to get people paying attention to the brain injury issue. And mid-June, it passed second reading, 323-0. So that was great. It's ultimately just gone before the Health Committee. I did get called to testify before the Health Committee, and it has now passed through the Health Committee. So I think we're on into the final stage of the third reading. And so we're very, very hopeful for that, but long overdue. They had addressed in the 2019 in the Prime Minister's speech from the throne, they had talked about creating, the exact quote was, a pan-Canadian strategy to address brain injury. And ultimately, during the pandemic, the brain injury issue went to the bottom of the pile, which you kind of understand, right? There wasn't a lot of sports being played at that point, and there were bigger health issues to look at. But it's great to see that as we've come out of the pandemic and regular life has resumed, that we're now back paying attention to this and finally addressing it. I mean, the way I think about it, Kami, is in the same way that having the seatbelt law, right? And if you remember when the seatbelt law, you and I are both old enough to remember this.
Oh, yeah.
Seatbelts were sort of an optional thing. They sort of annoyed people. And now, it's just not even a thought, right? Everybody puts on their seatbelt. And, as the son of a trauma surgeon, I can say, it's been hugely impactful from a public health standpoint. And so think about the brain injury issue in the same way. It's not about punishing or prosecuting people, but it's about making people aware that it is serious enough that it requires legislation. And certainly from a research and a treatment standpoint, having more coordination at the federal level is going to be hugely, hugely impactful for the health of Canadians.
100%. Now, I watched that testimony. You gave 5 rules in the testimony. Do you remember them?
No.
I know you were reading off a script, but you gave. This is not a test. I can pull this.
I certainly can't do it.
Yeah, that's fair game. That's. Listen, man, you're smarter than I am, and I just watched it. I can't remember it, so there you go. I'll pull this out. But I did watch that testimony, and I really, well, number one, it was pretty impressive that you kept on switching from English to French. I thought that's so. Are we looking at politics in the future? Is that something you're thinking about?
No, I guess I would never say never. It's funny. I got approached right after I retired, like in a pretty significant way, and considered it at the time and have not considered it since. I think that's a pretty tough gig, what those guys do. I mean, I certainly appreciate what public servants do. But yeah, I don't think it's for me.
Just speaking off the cuff, Tim, I will say this. The work you're doing right now leads me to believe that you're working from your heart and you're working from, a place that's actually looking out for the best interest of people, all through Canada. And probably why you don't fit in politics. But if you were to go, at least, I could vote for you. So there it is.
That's nice to say. I mean, listen, my family and my wife, I'm not going to lie. It's been a bit of a challenge because I did take a huge pay cut to do all this. Like I said, there's not a lot of heck of money in the not-for-profit space. That being said, Kami, I've lived a charmed life, right? I got to go to amazing schools. I got to play pro football for 10 years, with my parents both being physicians and my wife being a psychotherapist and my sister being a PhD nurse. I've been around medicine my whole life, having played for basically every team in the CFL and knowing all those medical staffs. I know all the medical people across Canada. And so, when it really came down for all this stuff and I looked left and right and it was like, if I don't do this, who's going to? Right. So anyway, it's in my mind, it's a little bit of me giving back for having had so much good fortune in my life. And, as a dad of 3 young, very energetic young boys, who likely will be following in our footsteps in some kind of way, shape, or form, for them and their friends and for kids all across Canada. I mean, this is important that we do this work. And it's not like going to the moon or curing cancer. Like, a lot of these things are very simple policy change fixes. And when you sit down and you think about it and you actually look at the scientific evidence, it becomes a no-brainer, pun intended.
Yeah. 100%. Well, if we just get past the point, and I think we're there. I hope we're there. It's been too long since I've had to hit somebody for a living, but if we can just get past the point where you think you got to tough this stuff out, and that if you're not, I remember certain coaches when I was concussed trying to rush me back and saying, you just don't care about the game anymore. Like, give me a break. Like, we cared about the game.
I love the quote. So we're very fortunate. We've got Major General Dennis Thompson, retired, who's on our board, and his quote is, "Suck it up, Buttercup is no longer an acceptable strategy."
Perfect. Well,
Yep.
That's one we both heard a lot of.
Right.
Not directed at us, however.
You know what? I mean, I think one of the interesting things, though, is we still want to teach our kids resiliency. I think one of the reasons that we loved football so much is because it was so hard.
Yeah.
There is a place for rough play, and you need a place for those kids that are oriented in the way that you and I were, where we had lots of energy and we needed an outlet for the rough stuff. Right. And doing that in an organized way and in a constructive and in a healthy way, is a great part of contact sports. Right. I always said the greatest lesson my dad ever taught me was, when you get knocked down, get back up.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful, unique part of contact sports is the getting knocked down. What we need to figure out is the getting knocked down, but removing as much of the risk as we can. And learning to play through injury is a good thing, right? It's learning to play through injury can be a positive thing. It's just understanding that brain injury, in the same way, that if there was ever a risk of spinal injury, it's like, well, you don't play through that. That's stupid, right? Because that could ruin the rest of your life. It's just applying that same logic to the brain. It's just something that you don't mess with. But at the same time, we want to use these sports to build resiliency. And we want to give an outlet to kids that need that rough and tumble play as part of their development.
It's one of the things you said to me when we got ready for this interview today. You told me that we can't forget that hitting is actually really fun. And it is, and it's part of what I think is lost in the last 10 or 15 years as boys are being taught that that's wrong, and it's really part of what we are as humans is taking that risk. It's actually getting physical. It's the rough and tumble play. And I am one of the guys that believes that there's an attack on manhood. So I 100% agree. It is important to learn how to get up when you're injured. It is important to suck it up for some of that stuff, but we can also protect our kids. And something else you said, I'll just, one last story about Chris Morris. And this, I didn't, I do have to tell this story because when I was concussed in Edmonton, and there was a few of them, but there was one time where I was trying to get back to play, And he came over with Tim Princeton, and they had a conversation in my driveway, and he said something to me that changed the way I looked at it, certainly, because I just didn't see the value of anything except my football career. I was just at one of those times in my life, one of those guys, later on didn't know where I was going to go, didn't want to end it. And he said, your brain is who you are, and you're breaking it. Like, he's one of those guys that knew. It's amazing to me that, that's a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. And I still needed to be convinced as a player. So I think Rowan's Law, and I think Bill B277 rather, huge impacts, man. I commend you for your work. I really do. And I appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah,
so
thanks, Commie. And so interesting what you just said, because we have a lot of teammates that are out there that are suffering from this stuff. The symptoms and the stuff that goes along with this is stuff that people aren't proud of. This is stuff that is really challenging. It's stuff that people hide, that families hide. And what happened to you, and you see this pattern over and over. It's asking somebody who's neurologically impaired to self-report is a terrible strategy. You need the bystander model. You need other folks in their life to step in. And, for us, a lot of those relationships are guys we played with, right? And the guys you really listen to, it's the same thing with the military guys. It's the guys they serve with. Those are the guys that they trust. And so for those guys that are suffering, a lot of times it takes, former teammate, somebody they served with to step in and say, hey, like, you need help and I'm here to help you. We have a helpline. Wherever you are in North America, we'll connect you with best available medical resources in your area. And unfortunately, Commie, lots of guys that you and I played with and against that are already in our brain bank. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And we've had dozens of guys come in through this. We will help them. We will connect them with medical resources. We will find them peer support. So if you know somebody that's suffering, that's having issues, if they've played, if they're have a sports background, if they've served, if they've been survivors of accidents or violence, they can come in through our helpline and we'll get them the help that they need. So our website's concussionfoundation.ca. You can Google us and come in through the helpline. We actually have a specific helpline for military. It's called the support line. And so get in touch with us. If you need help in terms of getting, former teammate, somebody you served with, you can easily get in touch with me and happy to help with that as well.
Amazing. Thank you. I'll make sure that I put that up and I'll leave it in the description as well. I'm going to let you go, but before I do, I want to ask you, 3 boys and they're young and you're an old fart just like me. So before they move out of your house, what 3 rules, and this can be about anything we've talked about today, about anything you've learned from your parents, it can be wherever, God, church, life, whatever. What 3 rules do you want them to follow and take into their life and really, really own?
Always believe in yourself no matter what, and go do your best. Always do your best and do your best to go do good in the world and to help others.
Awesome. Well, I think that you're a good example of those 3 things. So thank you very much, Tim. Awesome day. Awesome interview. I really, really appreciate it.
Cheers, man. Thanks for having me on and always good to see you.
Yeah, you too, buddy. You too. Talk soon.